I see so many friends and supporters and scientists, partners. I have my personal mentors in the room, and it's really extremely exciting to feel that we are on the cusp of kind of the next phase of Project Exploration's work. But you know, a lot of times we hear about standing on the shoulders of giants, and what you need to understand about Project Exploration is that we stand on the shoulders of students. Everything that's good, anything that you hear about today, you have to understand was shaped by students. They tell us what matters. They let us know what's important to them. And I've been thinking about our students. Very often it's graduation season, and we now, as we hit our 10th, 11th, 12th cycle of students, have students graduating college. And Danton Nicholson, he graduated from Kenwood High School. He just graduated from Cheney. It's a historically black college. He's on his way to a graduate program in engineering. Edna Angelis, who went to Curie High School. She's working as a professional scientific illustrator. We have Andres Boutron, who was at the First Perspectives Charter School. He's now in a master's program in geology in Montana. And, you know, just think about that, all of us who know Chicago public schools, to think of a Latino first-generation college-bound young man to go out of state to school and then to get a degree and then a higher degree in geology. We have to understand these are rare and precious moments, and they shouldn't be rare and precious, and that's what's bringing us here today. When my husband, Paul Serino, and I co-founded Project Exploration, we didn't anticipate any of this. We really started the organization because we were looking around to try to understand, well, whose job is it in the city of Chicago to make sure that young people, the young people that we most cared about, regular young people, had a chance to work with scientists and do real science. And the landscape that we saw back in 1999 looked something like this. There were incredible cultural institutions serving thousands and thousands of young people day in and day out, and there were highly competitive, very small elite programs for elite students or students whose families could pay for them. And there was really nothing in between. And there was certainly nothing for students, the ones we were most concerned with, the more than 50% who were not likely to graduate from high school. And so we started Project Exploration, and those programs started with two basic premises that are alive and well today in 2011. Firstly, that learning is based in relationships. And secondly, that real experiences are really the best experiences. When we started Project Exploration, we knew that science was, in a peculiar way, very unfriendly for lots of reasons in school, and we may end up talking about that today at the panel. We didn't appreciate until very recently how unique some of what Project Exploration is doing in terms of the national landscape for opportunities for young people in science. We started by targeting students who were open-minded and curious, irrespective of their grades. In fact, if they were struggling in school, all the better, and we've developed some strategies to actually reach out just specifically to those students. When we opened our doors, it was with Sisters for Science, and there's some of their journals here and some pictures of their work in action. And we opened our doors with the Junior Paleontologist program. Sisters for Science is an after-school program for middle school girls. They tell us what they're interested in. We bring in women scientists, and they spend the year exploring science and leadership. Junior Paleontologist program brings a dozen middle and high school students to the American West to go on a real expedition. Those programs are still alive today, thanks to many of the supporters in this room and folks like Abbott and the Motorola Solutions, who have really invested in us over the long haul consistently. And ever since 1999, when we had Sisters for Science and the Junior Paleontologist program, we've been off and digging. And now we're in a slightly different place. We serve 250 middle and high school students with very intensive programs every single year. We partner annually with about 40 Chicago public schools across the city. And our kids are CPS kids. 85% of our students come from low-income African-American and Latino families. 74% are girls. We have a lot of girl-only programs. And every single student has a powerfully wonderful contact teacher, because the trick, we believe, is in part connecting out-of-school experiences where students can find success to their academic lives. And again, we may get into that. But we could not do any of this without teachers. So what's our model? It's access to experts, it's high caliber, compelling, interest-driven content, and it's personalized learning over the long haul. We're much more concerned about long-term relationships than anything else. We want to get kids interested in science. Yes, who doesn't? But the trick is, how do you keep them interested? And how do you support them to really develop the skills they need to be equipped to pursue science in college and beyond, should they choose? And there's terrific programs around the city that we're able to partner with, like Stephanie's over at Northeastern Illinois, where we've got some partners waiting to receive those students and give them the ongoing support. We read and write with our students every day, and once you're in, you're in. There's no escape. So 1,000 students have been in our programs. We hit our 10-year mark, and we said, what is going on? We commissioned the 10-year study. You've got the executive summary. We're lucky to have some folks with us who worked with us on it. And we wanted to understand what mattered to students, because we wanted to shape our vision for the future. The lessons we learned, we think, are not just lessons for us and how Project Exploration can be a great organization with great programs. We think they're lessons that actually could inform the community in this room about what matters and how we could be working together. The study, the 10-year retrospective study, and the associated research and the dissemination was funded through the Noyce Foundation. And thanks to them, we were able to move from anecdotes to data. I think today's breakfast is an attempt to move from a single organization to a community agenda. And I'm very, very excited to have this community in this room and to turn the microphone over to Laura Washington, who's going to steer us through this morning. Laura is you probably already know her, but in case you don't, she's an extraordinary thinker, critiquer, political analyst, and journalist who specializes in national politics, race, social justice, and we are so lucky to have you with us. Thank you, Laura.
Thank you, Gabrielle. Good morning, everyone. Thanks, Gabrielle. You know, it's quite an honor to be here before you today. I've been connected with Project Exploration in one way or another since I think almost from the beginning. Chris Torkelson, a former staff member and an old friend, connected me to it and educated me about what you were doing, and I've stayed in touch with Gabrielle over the years. And it hits especially personally close to home with me, because I think I'm part of that demographic, Gabrielle, that you described. I grew up on the south side of Chicago, working class family, and had a really strong interest in science in high school. I was one of those people who loved to dissect the pig fetuses and loved to do the chemistry assignments, and thought I wanted to maybe go into pre-med or maybe become a biologist, which was something I didn't really even have a concept of what that really meant, but it sounded really exciting. But I was afraid of some of the math, and the math was very daunting for me, and so instead I chose to pursue the field of journalism, and I'm not unhappy that I did that, but I think about you know, what Matt Blakely said about opening up minds and how Project Exploration is able to do that. And if there'd been a Project Exploration around at that time, what difference it might have made in my life. But the difference it's making in so many lives, thousands of lives, is what we're here to celebrate today. As Gabe says, this is a coming out party for Project Exploration. You've been around 10 years, but the best is yet to come. And what we want to do today is explore the lessons learned that you're going to hear about from the study, but also to use those lessons learned as a catalyst to build on that success for the future. I'm thrilled to see such a diverse representation of people from the education field, from the activist field, people who come from many different fields and professions and interests, but who share and are united by the passion of educating and engaging young people, especially those young people who've been left out and left behind. Looking forward to the conversation today. I'm going to introduce each speaker one by one to come up and share their perspective on the work that's been done, and then we're going to join each other up here for some conversation, but we're going to leave plenty of time at the end of the program to have conversation with you. This program is being videoed and live streamed and recorded, and it's right now being recorded and shown on the PE website. So when we get to the conversation time and the Q&A time, be sure to use the microphones so that we can make sure we pick up all the conversation. And now I'm going to just get into this program by introducing our first speaker, Juna Snow, who is a research and evaluation specialist at the Center for Research, Evaluation, and Assessment, Lawrence Hall of Science at the University of California, Berkeley. She brings a formal background as an ecologist, as well as 15 years of experience as a curriculum designer, technology developer, and instructional trainer and teacher. Dr. Snow has also honed her expertise in applied social science research, including learning assessment, outcomes measurement, and program evaluation. And she is the author and lead researcher of the RIA study that you're about to hear about. And I'd like to ask her to come up. She's going to tell us a little bit more about the study, how it was done, and in particular, how it showed that project exploration is different from the other projects that look at this issue. Juna Stowe.
Okay, thank you. Does this work? Okay, it's good volume. Yes, I'm Juna Stowe from the Lawrence Hall of Science, and I'm not sure how many people are familiar with the Lawrence Hall of Science, but great, wonderful. We are a museum that also, so they're for informal science education. Also, we create curriculums. We have different centers in the hall. So there's curricula being developed, assessment being developed, and then our center, which focuses on educational research, evaluation, and assessment. So we were very excited to be contacted by Project Exploration to conduct a program evaluation of their program. And they basically came to us and said, we're at this 10-year mark. We're very interested in looking back and understanding what has happened with our past participants. So we decided to, frame this as a retrospective 10-year program evaluation. So we were excited that it was a request, because sometimes people are motivated to get evaluations because of accountability, and so it's much more fun when the program is interested in learning about itself, and we get to work very closely with the program to help them improve and provide them information that's going to be useful to them. So our goals really were twofold, and first to describe PE's influence on its past participants or its alumni, and two, to explain the organizational practices or strategies that support science learning and for traditionally underrepresented youth in science. So our approach was very systematic, and one thing that we wanted to focus on was looking at this database that they had created to, again, try to capture, document, and track what's going on with their participants. So this was our first place to start. And we also looked at all sorts of documentation, curricula that they were delivering, or their instructional materials, any materials related to their program delivery, also assessments or intake forms, things like that, past evaluations they had done. So basically a document review. And that gave us sort of our baseline to start working on a logic model, which basically works on articulating the program theory and their theory of action. And so we did this through a face-to-face session with the PE staff. It was very great to work that collaboratively and really helped us to understand what their goals were and how those related to their resources and their program design, and really to start to articulate their outcomes that they were really hoping to see across time, short, medium, and long-term outcomes. So this was very helpful, and that was our second major step. So at that point, we sort of formulated some key questions related to the goals, which were around in what ways has the PE staff and programming influenced the educational and career aspirations of the past participants and or the alumni, as we grew to call them, and in what ways have these alumni, their life choices been influenced by being involved in project exploration, and from those, how can project exploration inform their future program delivery or organizational strategies to continue to grow successfully as they had up to that point. So what we did is we first decided to use this database to identify who these past participants were, how we could contact them via email, and we developed an 88-item web-based survey to contact them with some closed and open-ended items. And all of this was done very collaboratively, and project exploration staff was very involved with all the instrument design, item choices. So it really was a big effort to make sure that we were reflecting what project exploration wanted to know about its past participants. So the constructs, or what we tried to target, the three major areas on the instrument involved these, and they relate very much to the questions and the goals, their past patterns of participation in project exploration, their educational or professional life choices, and their science-related attitudes and interests. So our sample came from their, at the time, 904 records of members, past participants, I should say, which included current and the alumni. So 547 of those had email addresses, and then 259 of those were 18 and older, and that's what we were targeting because we grew to define the alumni as having graduated from high school. So we used that 18-year mark as the criterion for their sample selection. So we ultimately got a 30% response rate, and about 65% of them were female, and the remainder being male. So after that, oh, and one thing on that instrument, they opted in to be contacted for telephone follow-up interviews. So to really get more in depth, but we still use those same areas of concentration to work with them, again, probing more deeply into their project exploration involvement, the influence that project exploration had made on their career and life choices, and then what were their future planning to get a sense of their trajectory since project exploration and moving into the future. So what we saw, and I'm just going to include a few of these now and I can talk more about them later, and you also have the executive summary, but basically strongly and resoundingly that project exploration had, and I'm going to frame it sort of in terms of what we had done with the logic model, in terms of looking at the medium and long-term goals, because we could see with current participants they were already achieving those short-term goals very easily, and you would expect to see that. So basically some of the medium they would still be experiencing or demonstrating while they're in the program, but definitely the medium, some of the medium and longer-term goals you would have to see over time and most likely past their time in project exploration. However, they remain so connected with project exploration, which is something that, again, came through very clearly in the survey results and through the interviews. That, so basically some of the things I wanted to mention, highlight I should say, would be that project exploration fostered their confidence to communicate about, and particularly about science, but also just communication skills and being confident in those ways. 96% of them strongly or agreed with that. That they had developed verbal and writing skills related to their experience in project exploration. That 75% of them had graduated, gone on and graduated, persisted to graduate in high school. And again, this is a very, these are very important outcomes in terms of the population that we're looking at, traditionally underrepresented youths in science. So that persistence was very wonderful to see. And along those lines, that 67% of the respondents had gone on to enroll in post-secondary education, which includes university or even graduate degrees. So we were very excited to see that because there was a lot of intuition that these things were happening, but that's what we were here to do, is try to capture this and articulate it and demonstrate it through the data. So we also saw that a very strong influence to influence the science aspirations or pursuits of these participants or past participants as pursuing this as a major field of study in school or in careers, whether they had gone on for post-secondary or even if they had gone directly into a career path. So that they had also developed approaches for solving problems, which is not only useful in science careers, but just in life. And so again, that really relates the approaches and model that project exploration uses in terms of positive youth development and science-centered or focused experiences that engage and create these meaningful, persistent learning in these students. So what else did we see? We saw a lot of good things. That they had modified beliefs based on these experiences. So 93% of the respondents agreed that they received new perspectives about their options in education, for work, for their life, during their time in project exploration. So not even necessarily only limited to science, but just their perceptions on what life can be, that things are possible for them. And they fostered traditionally underrepresented populations to actually go on into science careers. So specifically not only persist in school and education, but specifically into science careers. 32% at that point had held science-related employment, but many of those respondents were currently in schools, higher education. So that still, for those paths that had gone on to careers, 32% of them had held science positions. So again, we just saw so many wonderful things that was what the PE staff, project exploration staff, had told us that they knew was happening out there. Can we try to talk to these students and find out these participants and see what they had experienced and try to articulate that through the data? And what we saw was definitely 3 major dimensions of increased science capacity in these past participants, positive youth development that influence life choices, life skills, and this engagement in a community of practice with their with project exploration, keeping in contact for over 10 years of keeping in contact, knowing the staff by first names, still remembering them, and saying, I love them, they are my family. So just really just resoundingly great quotations that we heard, and it was just across the board, male, female, whether they had been recent past participants or longer term past participants. It was really a very wonderful finding, because we did strategically and purposely sample those telephone interviews to be stratified across the years of being a past participant, being male or female, and looking across their ethnicities. So again, this was just a wonderful findings, and I'm happy to talk more about that in the panel.
Thank you. Exciting stuff, and we're looking forward to hearing more a little bit later. What you just heard is you're going to hear again in a different way, and from the personification of the success of project exploration, the pride and joy of project exploration. This summer, Kaitlin Joy Judkins will graduate from DePaul University with a BA in public policy. Congratulations. As a matter of fact, in a couple of weeks, she first got involved with project exploration in 2003 as a member of the junior paleontologist program in the Dinosaur Giants team. After graduating from Jones College Prep, she continued with project exploration as a special project coordinator, and she also serves on its board of directors. She hopes one day to develop a nonprofit STEM-related organization that would mentor urban students, just as project exploration has done so well. Kaitlin Joy Judkins, come on up. And she's going to tell us about her personal experience, how she got involved in the project, and if you could talk about maybe a light bulb moment for you, what Matt talked about earlier about the opening up the mind, how that happened for you and when that happened.
Sure. Good morning, everyone. It's definitely an honor to be here. As people have mentioned before, this experience has definitely been an open-minder for me as a student. As Laura mentioned, I first became involved in 2003 as a junior paleontologist, and I actually had a teacher. I went to North Kenwood Oakland Charter School, and I was an 8th grade student. I'll never forget it. And I don't want to say I hated science, but I just had a lack I had a lack of confidence in science. I was a very shy student, and I was in my shell. It was very hard to get me out of my shell. Just like I'm not coming out, and but I was always very bright, always very expressive through my writing, through my speaking. And Dr. Marv Hoffman, he was the director of North Kenwood Oakland Charter School at that time. And he said, you know what, I've looked at this program and I think this would be an excellent program for you. And at first my response was just no. My mother told me, get involved. And I was just like, no, I don't think I can do it. I don't think it'll, fit me. And I was just so nervous because when I heard the requirement was to go on an expedition, I said, oh no, I can't do that. I'm a girly girl. Me climbing mountains, I could never do that. And so I remember the interview process with Gabe. It was just like yesterday, and I sat down with her, and we had a one-on-one interview, and I told her, she said, do you like science? I said, no, not really. And, she looked at me, and from that point on, me and her have just had a wonderful relationship, very personable. I look to Gabe just like a second mother. And it's not only her, just the whole staff. It's just very unique in the way they handle the students. And it's just always an honor to go in the office, to be recognized, for them to know my name, as Laura mentioned, and to just really know the students, to really know about
what they're going through throughout their day-to-day lives. And so when I went through the junior paleontologist program, one of the experiences that I can think of that was kind of a light bulb moment for me, that I always revert back to in my life now, is going on the expedition, because it was my first time being out of state in Montana. You know, it was an expedition, and so we really had to get involved with a lot of the fossil findings, and we do something that's called the lick test to make sure that it's a bone, differentiate the bone from, you know, like a rock. So when we do the lick test, we were all just licking around. And the lick test was just, you know, something that I'll never forget, learning about the dinosaurs. And, you know, just that experience was really phenomenal in my life because I came out of my shell. I definitely grew a confidence in science that a lot of students just aren't fortunate to have that experience. And the students who are in Project Exploration, they're able to relate to science in a way that is hands-on. And that's really important. It's a really important experience to always be able to, to always be able to relate to any type of subject that's hands-on by having personal experiences with that field. And so I can remember climbing the mountains in the Badlands of Montana. I can remember, you know, Gabe telling me to cowgirl it up when I was afraid to, you know, climb a mountain, you know, and those experiences stick with me till today. And so right now, I'm currently a member on the board as a student representative. And over that time, it didn't happen right away. I went to college at DePaul University, and I was always coming back to the office, being involved in some type of leadership role that really kept me connected to Project Exploration. And so the first leadership role that I was involved with was just working in the office as a project coordinator. And I was able to, you know, follow the study and kind of see some of the preliminary processes before the study began. So that was a really good experience to kind of see what that looked like, to have a conversation about what the program, how it was going to be represented in the study. And so that was really excellent too. I was able to take that with me back to school and actually, you know, talk about it in some of my research projects. So that was great as well. And in terms of just being a student representative, it's really a good experience because I'm able to talk about how my experience can help other students in the program and help them to become, you know, leaders in the program as well and hear their voices. And so that whole experience has just really pushed me forward into the career path that I want to go into, which is hopefully coming up with my own non-for-profit organization that reaches out to students as well in the city. So this experience has just been really great, and I really just want to thank everybody, the staff. The staff is just really unique. Even though the staff changes and the staff has changed from the time that I was a junior paleontologist, everyone is just unique in the way that they're able to reach out to the students. It never changes, no matter who's the director, no matter who is the coordinator. It's just a wonderful relationship between the students and the staff members. So thank you.
Thank you, Kaitlin. We're going to be hearing more from you. That's just wonderful. It's exactly what Gabrielle said. The long-term relationships, they never let you go. You're going to always be part of project, and that's a good thing. Finally, we're going to hear from Sara Stoelinga, who is the Senior Director of the Urban Education Institute, as well as Associate Clinical Professor on the Committee of Education. She leads research projects focused on teacher quality, and she also teaches within the Urban Teacher Education Program. She teaches and advises undergraduate and graduate students at the University of Chicago. In addition, she supports evaluation research across the Institute. And Sara's going to talk to us and give us some of her insights about the study, what she's learning from it, and how those insights can maybe be applied as we go forward, not only with project exploration, but with this field in general. Sara Stoelinga.
Thank you and good morning. So my role here is to provide some reflections, both on the Project Exploration 10-year study, to celebrate some of the accomplishments of Project Exploration, but also to use research to pinpoint some areas that project exploration can think about moving into the next decade or the next 2 decades or the next 3 decades or however long project exploration is serving students in the way that you just heard from the powerful testimonial that Kaitlin provided. The Urban Education Institute at the University of Chicago, in case you don't know what we do 4 things. We train urban teachers for Chicago in the Urban Teacher Education Program. We conduct applied research at the Consortium on Chicago School Research, and Paul Gorin, our Lewis Sebring director, is present here today. We run 4 campuses of charter schools on the south side of Chicago, one of which is the North Kenwood Oakland Charter School, where Kaitlin came from, who is a graduate from one of our schools. And we run a nonprofit organization that takes what we've learned and we're building tools that will go across the nation, across a number of dimensions. And the research that I'm going to be using to reflect upon the project exploration 10-year study and on the work of project exploration, in the brief time that I have to talk to you now, I'm just going to pull a couple of very brief findings. I'm happy if you want to learn more to share a longer memo that I wrote for project exploration, and also to point you to a couple of the studies that the consortium has conducted that I'm going to be referencing. But this is just to give you a flavor of some of the recommendations that I provided. I'm going to be relying upon 4 sets of research. One is a very important study, a seminal study that has been conducted at the consortium that's called From High School to the Future. And it's a set of studies led by Melissa Roderick and her team that focus on the pathway to post-secondary options from Chicago Public Schools. The second is a report that was led by Nick Montgomery, a researcher at the consortium, called Passing Through Science, that looks at the increased science requirements in Chicago Public Schools and the result of that. And then I'm going to focus a little bit on social capital research and on resiliency research to think about how project exploration can improve going into the future and to acknowledge some of the accomplishments that they've had over the last 10 years. So starting with Melissa's research, this is a massive set of studies with a number of both alarming and important findings. But really one of the most important things that's related to what project exploration does is that Melissa and her team discovered that college-going rates vary significantly across ethnic and racial groups and across high schools in Chicago. Some of the most alarming findings from that is we found that about 6% of Chicago Public Schools graduates get a college degree by the time they're 25. And if you're an African-American male, that number looks a lot more like 2%. These are alarming numbers. And so it's important that project exploration is serving these students, particularly low-income Latino and African-American students who have the most troubling graduation statistics. The other piece of the research that I think is relevant here focuses on the influence of attending a high school that has a strong college-going culture. Roderick's team really found that this is a powerful indicator, if you go to a high school with a strong college-going culture, of the way in which students engaged or didn't engage in the application process for college. So one of the questions that I pose to project exploration is, can you establish a more explicit focus on establishing this college-going culture and this focus on persistence in college as a part of the larger programmatic goals for project exploration? Can you build college-going culture focus in this after-school setting in the way that it's described in the consortium's research? This Passing Through Science report, again, looked at the changing requirements of increased course taking in science in Chicago Public Schools. Nick Montgomery led the research. And the report focuses on some accomplishments, which is that more students in Chicago took more science as a result of the requirements, the course requirements in Chicago. That being said, there's still much work to be done on learning how to engage students in scientific learning. So engagement, science engagement, and actually having students achieve at high levels within those courses is still a challenge in Chicago Public Schools. And so my reflection to project exploration is that they can play a critical role both in perhaps inserting themselves into helping Chicago Public Schools learn how to build course programming in science that increases student engagement. Given the findings in the 10-year study, this is one of the powerful things that project exploration does. And so can we think about this partnership as extending to advising Chicago Public Schools on how to engage students around science course taking? Third, this social capital research. The relevant findings around the social capital research really link and dovetail very well with the findings on the Project Exploration 10-year study. We know that social capital improves the outcomes of young people, and we know that it's most powerful when it's focused on actual content and a shared activity and course of activities together, and that positive social capital has tremendous effects on the life chances and outcomes, especially of young people, in increasing their confidence and self-image. What's interesting is that Project Exploration is already built around a social capital model, really at 2 levels. Social capital among the community of peers learning science together, and social capital building between the students and the adult professionals and educators in science. And so this in and of itself creates positive, powerful potential to build social capital. And making this a more explicit focus and goal of Project Exploration can allow both to measure outcomes in a deep way and also to more intentionally build social capital among students that can help them as they make the transition to college. Finally, the resiliency research. There's a body of research that suggests that investigates why some individuals facing challenges persevere and persist and have positive outcomes, while other individuals facing the same challenges do not. And these are often called resiliency traits. What is it that are built in these youth that help them to persevere and persist in spite of these challenging circumstances? We know that resiliency can be built. We know that it's most powerful when it's built through relationships. And we know that powerful programs that build self-efficacy and confidence help to build resiliency. So again, I encourage Project Exploration to think about resiliency building as an explicit outcome or goal of their programming, and focusing more intentionally their programming on these resiliency traits that we know in research are important, things like self-confidence, efficacy, optimism, and a sense of responsibility. This leads into, and I'm just going to highlight 3 of the recommendations that I made around future research, starting with the social capital and resiliency piece in particular. I think one of the important parts of the research agenda for Project Exploration going forward is thinking about measuring around outcomes that they already know matter in their programming. So if we already know that the programming is building social capital and has the potential to build these traits, these resiliency traits, then more intentionally collecting data on those types of outcomes in order to demonstrate the efficacy of the program. And so encouraging them, and Juna and I talked about this a little before the program started, about more intentionally building comprehensive databases about the students, and in particular using something like the consortium's on-track indicator to understand both the incoming nature, the incoming characteristics of the students who enter the programming, and the effectiveness of the program in contributing to their outcomes. And also trying to build instruments that more intentionally collect information around things like social capital and resiliency and self-efficacy, both at the beginning, before students enter the program, mid-course in the program, and at the end of the program. So these are some of the recommendations to help to just reflect on both what Project Exploration has accomplished, and also to push us to start thinking about the next generation of Project Exploration programs and how we measure deeply the kind of effects that this program is having on students.
Thank you. Much rich information and conversation to have. So I'd like to ask our panel to just step up to the plate, and we're going to have a little bit of conversation up here. We talked a little bit about, you were talking to me like a community organizer. You know, what do we do with this information and all these learnings going forward, not just in terms of what's ahead for Project Exploration, but what's ahead for this field and how we can build on it?
So I think I ought to probably just take a minute to say what's ahead for Project Exploration that we know about with some hope and some certainty. I think the first thing is that we're going to work to double the number of students we're serving. And so to go from 250 to 500 or 600 is no small challenge when you think about the things that we found that really matter. How do you maintain personalized experiences? How do you develop individualized support for students And specifically, how do you make learning opportunities more transparent? This is something that really came through in the research with the team from REA, was students felt that there was some randomness. They weren't always sure what was available in terms of what was next. It was clear to us on staff, but wasn't clear to them. So in terms of the student piece, the next thing for us is to build out what we're calling our science pathways. It's really a spectrum of programs that has a strand of discovery level programs where students who maybe don't know they're interested in science have a chance to get into science, explore that. There's a lot of youth development. As they decide they are curious about things, there's a set of explore programs where they can get into something in depth. And then for those students who decide they actually want to pursue science, I think this is an area that we really need to build on through partnerships. How do we equip students to be able to get into college and be successful in college? For first-generation college-bound students, that's not a given. And so again, the partnerships with the city colleges, with Northeastern, other programs, that's going to be a real important thing. So serving more students with more kinds of programs, working with scientists. The second thing is figuring out how do we take what we've learned and turn that into tools that that are accessible by other organizations. So we're developing a scientist development training program. So scientists who want to do outreach in our programs, we can think about consistency in our model, but also equip them to do outreach in other kinds of programs. That's an example of what we're thinking through when we think about making our model accessible. I think the last thing is we're really envisioning a kind of youth science center that would be a kind of hub. You know, when Kaitlin's program is up and running, when Project Sincere and many of the other folks who have programs in this room need a place to be where we can convene, where students have a place of their own, where scientists can come to the fore in those relationships. That's going to be a real game changer, not just for us, but for the landscape of what is seen, known, and available, we think, in the life of the city.
Because most of your programming is fairly decentralized then, right? You don't have a place to go. The places are out in the mountains and some of the other places that Kaitlin visited, right?
We don't drag everybody to Montana against their will, but we're nomads. We are programmatic nomads. There are benefits to that, to be in the Garfield Park Conservatory, to be on campus at the University of Chicago. There are absolutely benefits to the young people and to us, but ultimately you want students' work to be displayed. It's a way of validating it, it's a way of documenting it, and fundamentally it's a way of making something public. And I think that's a big part of the trick in an opportunity ahead. And so we do want a roof over our programs, but most of all we want a place where students can come and families can come and feel it's theirs.
Kaitlin, I'm going to put you on the spot, and I know you're a huge fan of Project Exploration. It was a wonderful experience for you, but what would you have liked to have gotten or experienced that you didn't get a chance to for whatever reasons? Or, I mean, and the program is certainly evolved over time, and you're still in touch with it, but what's the missing links or things that you'd love to see if they had all the money in the world that you think would benefit a student?
Well, definitely they need all the money in the world so that we can, you know, have more opportunities for students, like the experience I had and many other students. Like Michael, he's sitting here, and I know he had a wonderful experience too. But let me see, if I could think of something that I would like to see the program improve on, I guess just having more of a centralized institution where students can display their work and just be more centralized, because we are all over the place. And I mean, there were benefits for me because I wasn't very familiar with the city. I wasn't familiar with you know, places outside of the state, and so that was a benefit for me. But I think it would be a good idea to have a more centralized you know, place for students to come and, you know, talk to each other about what they're doing, and kind of just always keep in contact. I mean, students come into the office all the time and, you know, keep in contact that way, and there's always meetings going on, different events to bring students back and get involved with science. So there's always opportunity to do that, but it would be better to have it centralized in an institution.
And could you just talk a little bit about what the community environment was like when you first came to Project Exploration? Were there, you heard about this from your mother and you resisted. Yeah. Were there programs, other after school or outside of school programs that you'd heard about, that your peers were going to? What were the opportunities like for you then?
Well, at first, I wasn't too involved with any out-of-school opportunities, which is why I was so reluctant in the beginning about the program, because it was something new.
What were you doing with your time out of school?
Well, let me see. I was at North Kenwood at the time, and so I was involved with some after-school programs like cheerleading. You know, I mentioned I was a girly girl, so I was into cheerleading and that type of thing. But nothing to push me to be a leader. I love to write, and so a lot of the teachers at North Kenwood Oakland Charter School, they mentored me in writing and things, and just pushed me to look at different opportunities like project exploration. And so that's what kind of gave me the jump start to be a leader and get more involved in leadership opportunities. But other than that, I really wasn't involved in any out-of-school opportunities.
Mm-hmm. So that was it. But when you found PE, you were in love.
Yeah, I was in love, and I stuck with it.
Yeah. And Juna, I'd like to ask you a little bit more about the collaboration process and how that worked within PE and why that is important. What does that do that's different, do you think, if you think there is something that's different about it?
Well, with most of the evaluations that I work on, I do encourage that we work very closely with the program, because the ultimate goal is that what the product is, the report or the findings, are useful. And so if we don't have a strong understanding of what is going to be useful for the program, then what happens is they're having expectations on one wavelength, and we're operating, conducting research on another wavelength, and then you get to the end and go, well, that's not what we thought we were going to get. And so we definitely want to prevent that. And so it's very important in all the projects I work on that we develop a very participatory approach and collaborate. And sometimes it's limited on how much the program really wants to collaborate versus some level of participation at the minimum of approving certain approaches or instruments. But Gabe and her staff were very interested in collaborating and being aware, and like Kaitlin mentioned, just being able to learn from that process, because another objective that we always try to encourage is building a capacity for evaluation within programs so that they don't necessarily have to seek external support to understand how they've developed over time. They can build systems within their program as they are improving and as they grow, so that they can be tracking and monitoring and doing a certain level of internal evaluation along the way, which is very helpful for certain points in time when they do want to seek external evaluators, because they already have that sort of self-awareness and improvement and can demonstrate how they have been attentive to that. So they were doing that to a certain extent, but I think through this process that some of that awareness that they could be improving in that way came out. But it was very important to us, because we did conduct the study in about 7 months, so it was a pretty short timeline. And so again, very important to have that collaboration piece so we could ensure that we were on target with what they were going to find to be useful for them.
And have you done, you've done, I'm sure, studies like this before with other organizations. If you had a bunch of money thrown at you right now, how could you use that to benefit? What kind of additional research would you recommend for PE? Or is this a time to stop doing the research for a while and build on that? Or are there other things that they could learn right now that would be beneficial?
For PE specifically, I think moving in the direction of doing a more formal longitudinal study would be appropriate, because we had to basically do this retrospective, and that was appropriate for what they wanted to know. But what we found through their database that they had just implemented, really moving from tracking using sort of spreadsheets and other, paper-based modes to using a online centralized database where, sort of thinking about, well, how do our intake forms and all of these things fit into this? And so we had some of what we were hoping that we could reconstruct what had happened over the 10 years, but again, there were gaps. And so I think that the more they developed that, like some of the, what Sara mentioned, that then they could really do some tracking and to do a longitudinal study, because I think really being able to understand the effect and impacts versus the influence, which is really what we were only, really what I'm most comfortable with, the validity to say that they strongly influence these students and participants in their programs. However, you know, to really be able to say the effect and impact and to what extent, I think we would need more full data set, and also more time too. Is it just the more time you have tracking students and their achievements, then you are able to make with more confidence assertions of impact and effectiveness.
Sara, is there anything you want to pick up on that you've heard? I have a question for you, but is there anything you wanted to add to this discussion?
I agree. I agree with that. And I think part of this is helping project exploration both to think about the students that are within the program and learning more about them. So we need to have a better understanding of what their background is, how are they like or different from other students in their school, and be able to trace them longitudinally over time to really have a better understanding both of who these students are and what their outcomes are. And then I think the second piece is a question of outcomes. And this is when I was touching on the social capital and resiliency piece. What it's getting at is, I think that project exploration, yes, we want to influence graduation rates, and yes, we want to influence things like more students going to college, but I think there are some kind of intermediate outcomes that we should be considering, because the program is building things like self-efficacy and confidence and connectedness between students and adults who are scientists. And so we should start thinking about identifying and measuring some of those intermediate outcomes, which really requires us to collect information and data in a systematic and ongoing way through surveys of students, both before they come into the program, while they're in the program, after they leave the program. So I think it's a combination of building these databases that help us to understand better who these students are and what their trajectories are, and then also thinking about what kind of outcomes we can use to measure whether or not project exploration is having an impact.
Okay. I have a million questions, but it's almost time for us to get to yours, but I have to just bounce back on in the bigger picture in terms of what's going on in Chicago right now. We have a new mayor coming in, we have a new school CEO, a lot of change. The mayor has been very vocal about extending the school day. That's what was at the centerpiece of his campaign. He has been very vocal. He hasn't been very specific about it. Do you have any recommendations or ideas? I'm not asking you for a political judgment here, but ideas about, you know, because I was talking to an educator earlier about this, if you extend the school day, what does that mean for the out-of-school programs that will no longer be, well, they could still exist, but then you're talking about the kids are getting out of school much later. Will there be time for that opportunity? Will there be a need for that opportunity? What should that look like, especially around the science, math, and technology areas that, what do you think it should look like?
I think this is a hot topic about extending the school day, but I think actually I would frame it in a positive way for the way that it might benefit out-of-school programming, because I think extending the school day might actually open up opportunities for out-of-school programs to become part of the school day in a way that we can think about merging some of, or really blurring the line between in-school and out-of-school in a way that could be very productive both for project exploration and out-of-school programs and for Chicago public schools. So I would think about this as an opportunity both for project exploration to think about what goes on in the school day and vice versa. But I do think that extending the school day is an opportunity for us to think about, if we get an extra 90 minutes, what do we do with it? And how do we make sure that it's used in a way that's focused on subject matters that matter and deepening the good work that we're doing? And I do think that experts in fields like science and math have something to offer, both in making recommendations about what that extra time looks like and potentially participating in the process of defining how those minutes are used.
Yeah, this is a hot topic. I think it's not helpful for young people when we try to make severe distinctions between out-of-school time and for-school time. I mean, I think that if you look at high-quality science experiences, if they're at project exploration, they're inquiry-based, they're hands-on. The students are asked to construct ideas and build them. If you look at a high-quality, like one of our project exploration teaching fellows won the Golden Apple. What's going on in his classroom? It's hands-on, it's inquiry-based, they're constructing knowledge. So I think that for young people, we should be talking about what are great experiences, how do you get to know students, what's a relationship. So I think that's the teaching and experiential side. I think is a political side, though. Why are students getting out at 1:45? Why are we suddenly assuming that out-of-school service providers can somehow supplement or be better than teachers? I'm not sure that that's the case either. I think for Project Exploration, the way we've addressed it is to say, we have a role in the lives of young people when they're not in school. But our concern is that if they find success out of school, how is that being tied back to their academic lives so they can be seen as successful, they can be seen as having potential, so the teachers can rethink perhaps the role of students that are seen as screw-ups as actually being creative explorers, adventurers. So I think that when we think of a comprehensive after-school program, let's not have extended day be remediation. Let's not have it be more of the same, but let's also think about how we can be partnering as opposed to simply co-opting or pushing out.
Kaitlin, how do you feel about extended school days? Probably when you were in school, you wouldn't have been for them, but now with this perspective, no.
Well, you know, right now, I think it's interesting, and especially with my major in public policy, I look at it from the perspective of how communities, how that is going to reach out to students, and specifically African American men who are, you know, out of school. A lot of them are out of school right now for specific reasons. And I think I agree with Gabe. I think it's about creating relationships with the teachers. I know I also used to work with an organization called the North Kenwood non-for-profit organization in North Kenwood, Oakland community. And COCO, they specifically look at how students, you know, what are the things that engage students? What are the relationships? What are the motivators? What are the issues behind the scenes in the family lives that, you know, students need to express in order to become more engaged within their academic careers and lives and things of that nature? And so I think extending the school period would be helpful, but I think it needs to be more specific in connecting to students' lives and the issues that they face. Because if you understand the issues that students are going through, whether they're family related, whether they're, you know, issues with academic, you know, progressing, and I think that that's important to get students more involved and more motivated about staying in school, because you have to be motivated. If you don't have the confidence, if you don't have the motivation to stay, you know, on a topic or just even come to school, you can't progress. And so I think that's something that's important to be specific about, how students are going to be connected with the institutions, with the teachers. And that's definitely, you know, just the perspective that I have.
The program has to be really tailored to the specific community and constituency it's serving. Great point. Juna, did you want to weigh in on this in terms of your own research expertise on this question of extended school days, or good or bad, depending?
Well, I think it sort of always has to start with, well, what are the goals, and, you know, in what ways will it be useful? And if the goal is to basically increase test scores for schools, and because we live in this sort of accountability era and high stakes environment, if that's how the time will be used, and it's going to be more of a more traditional type of curriculum that is about rote recall and performance on standardized tests, then I don't know what the climate or environment is quite here, but I would be nervous that that would be one of the primary motivations for extending the time, and less about cultivating, even if there was a partnership with Project Exploration, that what makes Project Exploration particularly unique is that it does have a center around positive youth development principles, and they put that into practice and use science as an integrating focus for meaningful experiences that then, you know, the students are able to put into action, and it influences them in a variety of ways. That isn't really in line with let's get kids ready to take tests. So if it's about also it's about more, well, we're nervous about these kids that are at risk or traditionally do not persist or are resilient in school, then I could see potentially that partnership being very, very useful and effective. So again, it gets back to, well, what's the purpose, what's the goals, and if you don't necessarily have the whole story, then it's really hard to know. You know, it can sound like a good idea, but it could be used in a way that's not really the best for individual students.
Well, you raised another hot topic when you brought up standardized testing, at least in this room. But I will move from that hot topic to your hot topics. We have a microphone. Do we have a microphone set up? We're going to have a microphone set up in the middle of the room here. And if you have a question, if you could just step up, please, to the microphone so we can make sure you're recorded. And please state your name and affiliation if you're comfortable with that. And let's try to, if we can be as brief as possible so we get to as many questions before we're done. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Is this on?
Yes.
My name is Dean Grosshandler, University of Illinois at Chicago. You couldn't hear in the back, but the little child was saying, "I want to join Project Exploration." I have a question based on my work in STEM outreach for a long time, and as the chair of a loosely knit international group of researchers and evaluators in informal science education. And it's something I didn't hear you talk about, but I know you know about, each one of you. Kaitlin, you're included in this one. And it's, what price have you paid for being involved in what you're doing? So you had to change your identity in some way, right? Gabe, I know you've worked tirelessly. Juna, from our graduate work together, and now as a distinguished evaluator, and Sara, bringing in national research and local research to make this happen. What have you had to sacrifice, and what price have you paid, and what obstacles have you faced that can help us do a better job?
Well, that's a real downer. But a necessary, but an important question. Anybody want to take that first? Gabe?
Okay. Well, I would say the biggest obstacle we face, and maybe it's a price we've paid, is why aren't we serving 1,000 students? Why aren't you serving 10,000 students? Why don't you be in every state? You've got this great data. Why don't you just do more? And maybe we've paid a price. I would say it's an ongoing question. When we served 12 students, the question was, why weren't we serving 36? I think we have made some very intentional choices to first spend time knowing what matters, and then using what we know matters to try to shape what's going to be next. So we've decided to go to 600, 500, 600. That will make us, ironically, the largest youth-serving science program in the country. And we're particular. It's intensive, it's personalized, and we want to continue to learn from that. I'm not sure what price we've paid, but we're hoping that people will continue to fund us and that we'll get more money, and maybe that will be the price.
I didn't so much have to change my identity. It was more so just different characteristics that were brought out through leadership opportunities, being involved with Project Exploration. So that in itself was an obstacle for me because, like I mentioned, I was a shy, little girl, and just going through that process of coming out of my shell, learning more about science, a subject that I had lack of confidence in, was very difficult. Becoming familiar with a lot of the terms, that was something very new, and at first it was odd. So, just learning all those different things was definitely an obstacle.
I think the price to be paid when you're a researcher is that, and if you know the consortium's work, you'll know this well, that when the question is, did X or Y initiative work, the answer is always yes and no. And so the price I think that you pay in doing research, and I know, Juna, you can probably identify with this too, is sometimes we're so focused on being able to measure real impacts, and the way that I was encouraging Project Exploration to think about their long-term longitudinal study of impacts, that we tend to overlook sometimes the important accomplishments for individual students that we already know, just because there isn't some kind of a causal relationship and we can't necessarily prove it empirically. We have testimonials from students that are very powerful that demonstrate the impact. So I think that's kind of probably the trade-off of being a researcher, is you tend to become a little less optimistic.
You don't have to. Yes.
My name is Rajeshri Sen. I teach chemistry at Olive Harvey College, one of the city colleges of Chicago. I was running a little late, so I don't know if this has been addressed or not. Are you trajecting the students later, and what's the time trajectory? Because my problem is not that students are not getting into science, and I'm including all minorities, both at the high end of the academic spectrum and at the not so high end of the academic spectrum, but they are using science as a service to get into medical school, to get into pharmacy school, nursing, etc. So unless we change the image the social value of a scientist, the monetary value of a scientist in this society, a PhD will be viewed as a person who didn't get into medical school. There are lots of kids entering science. I have lots of minority students in my class in science, but they're not planning to be scientists. They're planning to be nurses, doctors, pharmacists, et cetera, et cetera. So we get science at the high school stage. They're doing fancy projects in chemistry, in biology. We go to science fairs, but that is not translating into a scientist in the future. So that's my problem.
Juna, has there been any research on this? Or?
I actually would like to address the picture that you just put out, which is that science is being a bench scientist, it's being a researcher. I think the first thing that we try to do is imagine that science has value for learning how to think critically, for learning how to read and write, for learning how to work together, and for exploring the world and having fabulous adventures you might not get to go on otherwise. So we are, in fact, our study, and thanks to Juna, they really embraced our request that we look at how science lived robustly in students' lives in terms of their academic and career achievement, but also, are you a parent taking your young person to a museum? Do you spend more time out of doors? Do you watch television shows that study science? I think the struggle in this country is to counter the myth that science is for scientists. Because when you have students that are not academically successful, when you have students where English is their first language, perhaps, or not, and they're still struggling with reading and writing, they never get to do the cool things in science, which is what opens up the world. So I think we're struggling to have a much more expanded picture of what's possible, and we're seeing students living in science in their lives in many, many different forms.
No, I kind of agree with you, but how are you going to prevent an engineer from doing an MBA and becoming an investment banker?
Well, I think her point is that that's not the goal of at least a project of exploration, is not to train people to be future PhDs and scientists, but rather to use sciences as a way of opening up their lives. And Kaitlin, you're a classic example. You're not planning on going into a science as a career. You want to go to law school, right?
Right.
But it was a great benefit to you. Now, that's a whole nother story.
I can talk about that if you want.
Right. That's.
Hi, Maureen Kelleher. I'm a writer and an activist, and I have two questions, one for my writer head and one for my activist head. I blog for Education Week about early childhood. So my question to, and probably this is for the entire panel if they feel comfortable.
Maybe we could have one or two take it.
Yeah, somebody take it.
Yeah.
But how early can we start? I write about early childhood. Can we get project exploration to go down to 4 or 5? And if not, who's going to do it in Chicago? That's one. Then my activist head says, project exploration has focused on girls, and that's fabulous. The stats that Sara's giving us from Chicago Public Schools say that we've got to do something about boys. How are we going to balance those things so we don't lose the girls, but we reach the boys in CPS?
Go ahead.
Yeah, I can feel that. So as far as early childhood, it's not too young. I have an 11-month-old. He's a scientist. He drops things over and over. Gravity works every time. Then we give him a helium balloon, and he's awfully confused. And so it's never too young. And thank goodness. I think, though, as there's a push to invest in early childhood and middle school as the turning point, I think we want to watch out that we don't assume it's too late. And so that's why we're focused on older students. They're the least well-served by quality out-of-school experiences. In terms of who's in the city, I am so excited about what is happening in the city of Chicago. We have terrific museums, cultural institutions, zoos that have great programs and have had great programs for decades. What we are also seeing, and what I'm very fascinated by as an activist and a researcher, is we are seeing lots of individual standalone programs. There's something called Kid Labs jumping up. There's something called Project Sincere that is like 4th graders doing engineer. We're hoping that the Project Innovation will show up in Chicago and be in schools doing engineering with elementary school students. So I think there are the possibilities of having an increasingly robust landscape. Here's the issue, and I think this is part of the lesson for us. Transparency is key. If you are in Whitney Young, you may have a counselor who knows about lots of science opportunities. If you're in a regular neighborhood school, nobody there necessarily knows. We put out a guide called Discover Your Summer. It's the only guide to summer science programs. Information for parents being accessible is one of the tricks we have to solve. It shouldn't be that hard.
And but your point about the boys, the question about
Sorry,
the boys.
Project Exploration launched a boys program last summer called Mach 10, the Men's Aeronautics Challenge. Boys programs are going to be alive and well to pair with our Sisters for Science programs. Single-sex programs have real benefits, but they can't just be the absence of girls or the absence of boys. They're really specific strategies that you need to bring to the fore in terms of that learning environment. But we're getting those up and running.
I would just add that one of the things that we've done at the consortium, and I mentioned this briefly in my presentation, is we've constructed something called the on-track indicator, which essentially identifies students in their freshman year, and we're able to predict with about 80% certainty, just by looking at their freshman year attendance, grades, et cetera, how many of those kids are likely to drop out of school. And I think that those on-track statistics are most often used in schools either for accountability purposes at the school level or to identify those students for more rigorous academic work, particularly around English and math. And I think there's an opportunity here to think more broadly about that. We know who these kids are. We can identify who these at-risk kids are with a high level of certainty. Perhaps this is the time when we start to think more broadly about what kind of interventions those students get, and maybe there might be more motivating forces in some of these out-of-school programs to keep them connected and in school. And so I think we should think broadly about that.
Hello, my name is Tara Chavez. I'm a junior at DePaul University, secondary education biology. I'm actually hoping to get some tips or advice because I plan to teach in a low-income school in Cicero-Berwyn area.
Wonderful.
I just want some tips or advice that anyone can give me to start a new science program because I've had so many overwhelming experiences where young girls come up to me and are like, science is for boys, it's not for girls. So I definitely want to start a program.
You want to start a program when
I become a
become
teacher,
an
right?
educator in your
Because
school.
I
Wonderful.
plan on teaching in that area.
Well, Kathleen St. Louis, who's here somewhere in the audience, is going to wave to you. There she is. Check in with her. We will be starting our Science Teacher Field Institute up again, and we're hoping to talk with Chicago Public Schools in general about trying to support their after-school orientation, thinking about what is quality after school in science and how could teachers be creating spaces like that. We also can put you in touch with teachers that are doing it right now in Chicago and in the suburbs.
The Field Museum has a teacher fellowship program as well.
The Museum of Science and Industry has started a certification program for science teachers, which may be a resource also.
I would also add there's a wonderful website resource called Donors Choose that you should become very familiar with. It's a place where you can post your classroom needs and donors can log on and donate whatever materials you might need for your science program to your classroom. So anybody in the audience who's an aspiring teacher should know what Donors Choose is. I think it's a good option for building science programs.
Hi, my name is Hector Reyes. I'm a physical science professor at Harold Washington College. So I am on the receiving end of the neglected students by CPS when it comes to science. And I had taught courses in all the spectrum. And in one of the courses, basic courses, we deal with the issue of scientific literacy and how scientific literacy in this country is really so low and how unfortunate and how against democracy that comes out to be. But I mean, I just look at the report that you just put out and I look at the work that you've been doing and that report is an incredible tool for many of us. I just want to emphasize that. But at the same time, I feel very saddened that an organization like Project Exploration has to exist, that this report has to come out because students are being neglected by our school systems. And I just want to flip the question and the whole context and say, you know, you just proved that poor Latino and Black kids can do science. But when you flip it over, we don't have to prove that. The truth is that you would believe that they cannot do science if you were prejudiced, if you were a racist, so that you had to go over this effort to do this thing is really unbelievable at the times that we live. And it just points to the question that I have. What is CPS going to do about this thing?
Well, if only we had someone from CPS. Is there anybody in the room from CPS who wants to help answer that question?
John Lohr. John Lohr, come to the podium.
Well, do you want to talk to this, Michael? Michael, do you want to speak to this question? No? I'll put you on the spot. Look, you know what? I would argue, thank you, you're right. Right? It's disgusting and it's horrible. What we see over and over, though, is that science is really acute in this area. The assumption is that if you're not interested in science, it's not for you, and if you're not smart in an academically documented way, science is not for you. It couldn't be more the opposite. The most creative thinkers are the ones who get up out of their chairs and can't sit still, who are curious about everything. So science exacerbates this in many, many ways, but what we're hopefully showing is we should stop writing off students who are C students and below, who are English language learners, and who come from under-resourced schools. Those kids can not only excel, they are the future face of science.
Yes, sir.
Hi. I also have two questions. One is technical. You have a 30% response rate. To what extent is that sample of respondents representative, and do the recommendations reflect those 70% that didn't respond for whatever reason? And the second question is, I'm Chris Greer, I'm an astronomer at U of C, and my science turning point was getting to visit and go observing with an astronomer when I was in college. And so I'm really curious about what sort of day-to-day interactions the program fosters with science, and maybe particularly from Kaitlin, like what your experience was. The Montana trip sounds really great, but that sounds like it's a couple of weeks in the summer, and you know, I'm wondering like what happens the rest of the year.
Great questions.
Great.
Kaitlin.
Is the mic on? Okay. Well, before we went out to Montana, we had a classroom session for about 6 weeks before going out in the field, and the classroom session taught us a lot about, you know, what are the fossils, what are the different eras, like the Cretaceous period. And you know, the different periods, different scientific research. We learned a lot during that time, and I think that was a crucial time for me as a student, as a transitioning student in science, because you learn the technical things about what science is, and you learn how to use it hands-on going out into the field. And so that was definitely a good connection, and it's definitely not a program that creams. You know, I know a lot of times I've been in programs as well where I just felt disconnected because I wasn't interested in science or whatever subject they were focused on. Like they said, I want to go to law school. And so it really takes a lot for a program to reach out to students, specifically minority students from low-income areas here in the city, and push them to think about a subject that is just really you know, out of reach for a lot of minority students, such as myself, who wouldn't even dream of going into the science profession. I know right now I'm doing an internship at Exelon, and I'm working in the behavioral program to change people's behaviors about looking at green technology. And so I went down the environmental track and looked at different environmental sciences and how that fits into different people's lives. But I really want to go into the legal system. I want to look into human rights work. And so going through the program, I really had a connection with, you know, they connected with me with the different things that I wanted to learn. It was about me. It was about, you know, my peers and how we could connect through the staff and learn more about science. So it was different. It was definitely a phase. It was definitely different stages through the program that connected not only me, but other students as well in different areas that they felt they wanted to pursue. So definitely getting back to your question, it was a classroom where we learned more about the technical things of science.
Yeah, do you want to answer the...
And Christopher, just to explain, the science teaching in our programs is all done by scientists. And so after school programs, we set it up, we get the students going, we look at kind of supporting the students and getting them ready. The scientists come in and do all of the teaching about the science and also sharing their lives.
Juna, do you want to answer this question about the numbers?
Briefly about the 30% response rate is, again, it was a retrospective study, so we basically tried to go back and describe the influence of project exploration on the past participants. Again, you know, we're limited by how their systems of tracking, but I think that for alumni surveys that have been done, that, you know, most universities do alumni surveys. I mean, these are these are done across different levels of organizations, and 30% response rate is not bad. It's, you know, pretty common, so we felt good about that, and we made lots of efforts to get people to respond. And I think that, again, it's not a longitudinal study, so I wouldn't make the effort to try to generalize to the non-respondents. However, the richness and of responses that we did get from the respondents, I think, does allow for an accurate portrayal of the influence of project exploration. And that is why we did not only survey and then did the more in-depth interviews to just sort of really try to verify and more richly describe what we were learning from the survey.
We're just about out of time, so I think we only have time for one more question. Sorry.
I'm Shelley Orbach. I've taught secondary level of physical science and physics and earth science. I wanted to offer a suggestion to particularly the people at Project Exploration, but it's really for everybody in the room. Mayor Daley had introduced a book that he wanted the students to read over the years. And I'm thinking to myself, now that the new mayor is coming along, what about introducing a scientific activity to everybody in Chicago? And here's the idea. Okay. How much window glass do you have in your building facing south as a percentage of the whole wall? The more, I'm guessing, the more window glass you have, the lower your energy costs. But there's no way to actually test that unless everybody in their own building was to go and measure the window glass in their south-facing exposure in that building and look at their energy bills. And if it was done citywide or neighborhood-wide or on some kind of very big level, you might see an emerging pattern in that. If I were presenting problems like this to people who live in Chicago, you can only imagine the number of connections that you would have between students, parents, landlords, the city, green technology, all of these things. And then you can extend the variable to things like the color of your roof or how much insulation they've got in their roof and things like that. I'm just thinking that this should be a problem-specific kind of thing and not trying to sell science to people who don't really understand what science is unless they've got a problem in front of them.
All right, bring it home to them. Bring it home to them in a real personal way.
There you go.
Well, Rahm Emanuel just released his transition report, and he says the transition team is going to be ongoing. So maybe that's something you might want to suggest to his transition folks. They're looking for ideas. One last final question.
I have one last final question. I'm Stephanie Levy. I'm the student coordinator of the Student Center for Science Engagement at Northeastern Illinois University, and we work at the college level to provide students with the support, resources, and experiences they need to move into lifetime careers in the sciences. And we serve underrepresented and low-income students, and our students have really complex needs. And I wanted to ask you how you engage the families, because one of the things that we run into is the parents are saying, why are you spending time in the lab when you could have a job? Even when the student has a stipend, they don't understand what science is. So we're trying to work with a family and wanted to know how you do it.
Okay.
The best way for us to work with families is to have families working with each other. Because we've had these deep relationships with some families over many years, we're increasingly asking parents to be present, to help get the word out, to speak with each other. You know, when Kaitlin came out in the field with us, her mother was excited about that opportunity. We've had the opposite. We've had both families who didn't know that Yellowstone was out of state until we suddenly said there's a plane leaving tomorrow and didn't realize that that was not obvious, you know, and realized how little we understood about assumptions we were making. So there's a lot of things that we learn from parents that they're helping us with, but the best thing we can do is put one mother on the phone to another mother to talk about how this is not just going to be okay, it's going to be wonderful, that she trusts us, and so that's a big piece of it, is having the parents be advocates. But there's a huge opportunity for us moving forward to do more of that.
Any final words? I want to just thank the stellar panel. Please, let's give them a round of applause. It's been a fantastic conversation. Pardon me?
So I just want to, on behalf of Project Exploration and our board of directors and staff, I want to thank you. On behalf of the students, your interest matters. The fact that you're curious about what's happening with them matters, and I want to thank you for that. There's some information on the back table. We encourage you to take it. We will we will be here. And the last thing is, I think that if this is an interesting topic, if you think working together would help and would matter, it's something we want to know about. This is the community this is the cross-section of Chicago involved in this, and I think that we're already engaged. The question is, can we get organized? And so we're hoping to do that with you, to be intentional and to change the future. So thank you again for coming.